Hi, my name is Joanna Wong, and my online presentation topic is on Sally Horner. So I will be talking about who Sally Horner was, and the topic branching off of Sally Horner is a book called Lolita, written by Vladimir Nabokov. So for some background information, Sally Horner was a 5th grade student, an 11-year-old from Camden, New Jersey. She stole a 5-cent notebook and was caught by a man named Frank LaSalle, posing to be an FBI agent. Months later, he convinced her that the government needed her to go with him from Camden, New Jersey, to Atlantic City. And so Sally convinced her mother that she needed to go on a friend's school trip. This is from the dates 1948 to 1950. Over 21 months, Sally was held captive by Frank LaSalle and was repeatedly assaulted by him. They moved over these months from Atlantic City to Baltimore to Dallas, and then to San Jose, California. In San Jose, Sally was finally able to phone home for help and to fly back home to Camden. This is because she opened up to a neighbor, and the FBI found her living in a trailer park. She was reunited with her family, but only 2 years after coming home, she was killed in a car accident on her way home from a trip to the Jersey Shore. She was 15 years old when she died. For some background information on Frank LaSalle, he was a 50-year-old child molester. When he met Sally under the guise of it being an FBI agent, he was under the pseudonym of Frank Warren. He was released on parole 2 months prior to meeting Sally after serving time for statutory rape of 5 girls. All these girls ranged from 12 years old to 14 years old. He posed as Sally Horner's father while they traveled and lived in the different parts of America. And he was arrested under the Mann Act, known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, and it criminalizes the transportation of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any immoral purpose. And some background on Vladimir Nabokov, the author of Lolita. He became a Russian and American novelist, short story writer, poet, translator, and lepidopterist. He was born in 1899 and died in 1977. He grew up in St. Petersburg and then moved to Crimea, then England with his family, and then finally, when he and his wife got married, they moved to the US to escape the war in Europe. In America, while specifically teaching in Cornell, he had finished writing his novel Lolita between 1948 to 1959. And for some background on what Lolita is, it is a story about a man's affair with his 12-year-old stepdaughter. After writing Lolita, it faced difficulties in publishing as it was seen immoral and controversial. However, it was eventually published in France and then in America. It was praised for its high aesthetic value and even had a sale for movie rights and a screenplay deal. The story, already controversial, would later become even more controversial in regards to parallelisms between his novel and the real-life tragedy of Sally Horner. What was done to Sally was immoral and heinous, a tragedy that shocked society by exposing just how twisted individuals could be. However, this tragedy brought to light society's tendency to blame rape victims instead of being a source of comfort and care. Sally suffered taunts and stigma after returning home from California, and her mother even said as a statement, "Whatever she has done, I can forgive her," as if any of this was Sally's fault. Sally was also an 11-year-old girl who enacted thievery in hopes to join a clique of girls from her school. She was an honor student and just wanted to fit in, which is a normal sentiment for a young girl to want to have. However, because of Frank LaSalle's perversion, he took advantage of Sally and her elementary understanding of the world. Underneath the crimes committed against Sally was a terrified 11-year-old girl who was assaulted and raped by LaSalle because of his manipulation and threats that he was part of the government and would turn her into a reform school for stealing. The manipulations didn't stop there, though, as Sally was able to write and phone home frequently, maintaining the illusion that she was safe with LaSalle, keeping her mother ignorant to the danger that lurked in the same house as Sally. The illusions did not stop there. As they moved to Baltimore, Sally and LaSalle maintained a perfect father-daughter relationship on the outside, with Sally even attending a parochial school and LaSalle working as a mechanic. However, underneath and at home, he would rape Sally multiple times, threatening her with a gun to keep her in line and intimidate her with imprisonment if she ran away. When Sally was rescued from California and returned home, she tried to maintain an orderly everyday life but was bullied by her classmates, despite them knowing what she had gone through. All of this is evidence to prove that Sally was just a girl who had been taken advantage of and manipulated by a perverse man whom the state had let go on parole despite his numerous rapings of minors. Not only had her mother and close friends failed Sally, but by extension, the state and government had failed Sally by letting Frank LaSalle walk away from prison on parole. Following the brutal crimes against Sally Horner, Vladimir Nabokov became inspired by real-life events to write a fictionalized story that he then denied was based on Sally Horner despite the clear parallels between the two. He insisted that Lolita was never influenced by Sally. However, the parallels in the novel to real life was just too great. Weinman, author for The Real Lolita, The Kidnapping of Sally Horner and the Novel That Scandalized the World, stated, "To admit he pilfered from a true story would be, in Nabokov's mind, to take away the power of his narrative." She argues that recognizing the connection doesn't diminish his remarkable achievement, but it does augment the horror he captured in his novel. In saying this, Weinman sees Nabokov as a man with an ego who desired to make a commentary on young female violence, attributing his story to his own imagination as opposed to basing it off of real life. In Lolita itself, Nabokov wrote, "Had I done to Dolly, perhaps, what Frank LaSalle, a 50-year-old mechanic, had done to 11-year-old Sally Horner in 1948. In a sense, Nabokov is explicitly stating that he was, to some respect, affected by Sally Horner. With saying this and Nabokov explicitly writing this in his novel, he shows his audience that his morals for writing a novel that he insisted was from his own mind, was for the benefit of his own work rather than protecting the dignity of a girl who was manipulated by a child predator. In a counter-argument against the idea that Nabokov wrote Lolita based on Sally, yes, it was perhaps influenced by her, but the general idea of human horrors that are committed against the world lean into the taboo aspect of the horror genre that unfortunately can become reality. Some argue that Lolita itself is not immoral or unethical, but much of what it describes, however, is immoral and unethical, which is the point that Nabokov is trying to make with the novel. Nabokov has said that Lolita has no moral in tow, meaning that there is no specific direction that Nabokov wants the reader to think, but rather it is up to the reader's interpretation after reading the novel. Along the lines of morals and morality, Will Norman from the University of Kent writes, "Nabokov's ethics cannot be ours, and any attempt to rehabilitate Lolita as a moral novel robs it of its time." By saying this, Norman means that morality only occurs when Lolita is that, within the temporality of the text, leading to questions of what position the reader is left in and what are the ethical implications of this position. This all boils down to reader autonomy, that after reading Lolita, it is up to the individual reader to come up with an ethical and moral standpoint rather than to groupthink with Nabokov. Along with the morality, Lolita is not based upon specific horrors of reality, but rather reality in general and the lack of safeguards in place to stop cases like Sally Horner from happening again. The horror genre, as Pinetto describes, is the contemporary horror genre is sometimes criticized in modernist terms for being aligned with the degraded form of pleasure-inducing mass culture. They say, in effect, that mass culture produces pleasure, which describes the consumer into the dominant ideology. But she also quotes another author's critique of the horror definition by saying, Modeleski argues that the decentered, disorder horror film, like the avant-garde, changes textual codes in order to disrupt narrative pleasure, and that as such is a form of oppositional culture. With this definition of the horror genre in mind, and with Nabokov's morality stance on Lolita, it seems as though Nabokov wrote this with the context of the recent crimes against Sally Horner, to show society the extent of perverseness within society so as to become more aware in general. Rather than focusing on the debate of whether Lolita was based upon Sally Horner or not, the importance that Nabokov intended is the emphasis on the immoral acts of a perverse man to highlight that horror is not only in literature and forms of media, but it is also around society. It's just that society refuses or does not want to address the realities of horror. Sally Horner was an innocent 11-year-old girl who was subject to the worst 21 months of her life and even following, when she was taken advantage of, both by Frank LaSalle and by the author Vladimir Nabokov in his novel Lolita. Some argue that the immorality of Nabokov is because of his taking of real-life events and placing it into his novel, while others argue that it is because of the book that is immoral, and others even say that neither the book nor the contents are immoral, but rather a reflection of the immoral society. Either way, the main emphasis is that Sally Horner was failed upon by her mother, friends, and society at large for the horrors that were done against her. And it is the responsibility of society in general to make sure that even if she was taken advantage of during her years alive, that she is not to be taken advantage of and made a spectacle even in her death, as Nabokov had done. The horrors of real life is that tragedy does happen, as it did to Frank LaSalle, and that the taboo and unethical actions in the eyes of society win over individuals, like Frank LaSalle, to commit heinous crimes. Thank you.